60% mental and 40% physical.
Math was never our strong suit, but breaking down Ohio State football is. Sit back and join us for Buckeye Grove Instant Access, part of the Unscripted Ohio Podcast Network.
You can do it!
Brought to you by BuckeyeGrove.com. Post-game thoughts, immediate analysis, and much, much more to put the big game into perspective. Without any further delay of game, here's your host, Kevin Noon.
Kevin, goddammit.
Hey, welcome to the BIA podcast. I am your host, Kevin Noon, and we are going with just one co-host. Braden Moles has joined me here in Piscataway, New Jersey. 56-21, Ohio State wins in a game that had a little bit of everything, had some good moments, had some not-so-great moments, probably not the type of bludgeoning that everybody was expecting. I mean, how many times are you going to sit there and have a 35-point win and have everybody kind of walk away going, well, you know, that was that. But, you know, let's get right to Braden and his immediate opinions of this game that just was.
I think it was certainly the sloppiest game of the season. I mean, you've had some kind of, knockdown dragouts with Wisconsin and Michigan State, but overall I think the execution was kind of weak in this one, especially when you look to the second and third team. I mean, I think they have come in and done a very reasonable job in other games that, you look at the Maryland game, something like that. But when you look at this game, Chris Chugunov only 5 of 14. That's probably his worst performance of the year when he's had any significant playing time. So I think, when you look at the second and third team, it was kind of a lack of execution, which is kind of, what they've been preaching all year. So I think it was certainly a sloppy win, but a win is a win. So, whether it's, beating Maryland 73-14 or Rutgers by this score, I think it, win's a win.
Ohio State was not without some issues early in the game. Garrett Wilson puts a punt return on the deck. That ends up leading to a Rutgers score at that point. And, and some of the errors continued beyond that. But I think it's important to focus really on what the first team was able to do. Justin Fields, 15 of 19, 305, a career high for him, 4 touchdowns. So that was good. 89 yards for J.K. Dobbins on 17 carries. Never really had that big hitter with a long of 18. He only played in the first half. And Chris Olave on the offensive side, 4 receptions for $139. He was held out of the end zone. Benjamin Victor really, was a beneficiary with a couple of touchdowns there. But when you look at the first team, I definitely think that there were some things there that you can sit there and say, okay, these are good regardless of who they're playing, whether they're playing Rutgers or they're playing Michigan or they're playing Penn State or whatnot. There was some execution there.
I think this was certainly, Justin Fields' best performance of the season, just in terms of going out there and finding his targets. I mean, they played much better defenses like Wisconsin's defense, where he did well there as well. But I think, only 4 incompletions, I think a couple of throwaways. So, I mean, he really was basically perfect passing the ball, and then obviously career high in passing yards. And then I think Olave has started to really take that step. I touched on this in last week's What We Learned, but really taking that step as Ohio State's best playmaker. I mean, 4 catches for 139 yards. A little unfortunate for him, he didn't get in the end zone, but you really can't ask for much more from him, out of his performance today. And then, like Kevin had said, with Benjamin Victor and then KJ Hill getting in on the action as well. I mean, I think when you look at the first team, it really was, 42-7 basically when the starters were playing. So I think the final score is a little lopsided when you consider everything, but the first team 42-7, that's a really strong performance from them.
Ohio State holds Rutgers to 231 yards, if my math is correct. $110 on the ground, 121 yards passing. I mean, let's remember Rutgers had their starters in throughout the entire game. They certainly weren't going to go to their 2s and 3s when Ohio State made that decision. Ohio State didn't get into the backfield that much. This is the last game that they're going to go without Chase Young, but with no Chase Young, no Jonathan Cooper. They held out Damon Arnett for precautionary. They had a sack. They had some tackles for losses. But, Rutgers really made a concerted effort to get the ball out of the hands of Johnny Langan as quickly as they could. And, they didn't have a lot of prolonged success, but they were able to get a couple pops here and there. And, some of the damage came against the 2s and the 3s. But, credit to Rutgers for trying to play a 4-quarter game there and just try and build on, what's been a pretty down season.
I mean, I think in terms of Ohio State's defense, you really couldn't have asked for much more of a better start from them. I think it was 2 turnovers in the first 4 plays. So, I mean, you really can't ask for much more from them with that. I mean, Sean Wade had an incredible interception and then obviously forcing the fumble on the next possession. But then looking at, I was a little surprised that you didn't see more from the pass rush. I mean, I think after the 7-sack performance against Maryland, Rutgers, they're both bad teams. I'll say it, but Maryland and Rutgers. I think Rutgers is kind of a worse team than Maryland, so I was surprised that the pass rush could not really find their way today. But I think getting Chase Young back will kind of get all those gears turning again against Penn State.
One more question before we go to our break that I'll kind of pose there. They're coming off of back-to-back games against teams in the bottom of the Big Ten East. Probably a little difficult to get up for these types of games with Penn State and Michigan lurking. How much of a malaise do you think may have even just kind of been there in terms of they've been kind of on a bit of a roller coaster with the Chase Young saga. They know that they know Penn State is coming next week. They know just how important these next two games are, and we see it year in and year out. Everybody struggles to get up for a dozen games. I mean, there are going to be down games. Your good teams, their down games are still going to end up being decisive ones at that point. But what do you think? I mean, some people call it lack of focus. Some people just say it's hard to get up for all the games. What say you?
I mean, I think this certainly acted as sort of a wake-up call. I mean, it's hard to say it's a wake-up call when they've won every game this season by 24 points, or at least 24 points. But, I think you had some of the issue, with Garrett Wilson muffing the punt that immediately led to the Rutgers score, and then, just some of those issues, letting some of those big gains from Rutgers go through. I really think this will serve as a wake-up call as they head into these bigger games against Penn State and Michigan because, as I said earlier, execution is something they have been preaching all season, whether it's from Justin Fields all the way down to Gunnar Hoke, from the first team to the third team. And the second and third team really weren't the ones doing that great of a job of executing today. So I think this week going into Penn State, really writing everything. There were a lot of teachable moments from the game today, from Garrett Wilson returning punts to, there was a lot of stuff that you can look at that Ohio State could improve upon going into these next two games.
We'll talk about the rest of the Big Ten and the NC2A here in a second, but first a word from one of our sponsors. Hague Water Conditioning has been treating well in city water in Central Ohio with American-made water filtration products for over 60 years. Have a water quality problem? The water treatment experts at Hague know how to solve it. Not sure if your water softener is working? They will test, inspect, and sanitize any brand of water softener for only $20. Schedule a system checkup or water test today by calling 614-836-2195 or visit them online at HagueH2O.com. That's HAGUE H2O.com. Welcome back to the BIA podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Noon, joined here with Braden Moles from SHI Stadium, or whatever the acronym is, here in Piscataway, New Jersey. Ohio State, a 56-21 winner to move to 10-0 on the season, still perfect in Big Ten play. And speaking of Big Ten play, we had, as at the time that we're recording this, most of the games are already done. Penn State was a touchdown better than Indiana. Michigan really poured it on Michigan State 44-10. In a non-conference game, Northwestern 45-6 over UMass. Wisconsin was 16 points better than Nebraska. And then, of course, in the Big Ten, a Big Ten West major game, Minnesota and Iowa. Minnesota comes up on the short end after having some opportunities toward the end, just unable to overcome it. Now they're sitting with a loss. What are you seeing now with how the Big Ten is shaping up? I mean, obviously Ohio State kind of knows what they need to do. The West is a mess, as we kind of expected. 2 weeks left.
I think it's really interesting when you look at Ohio State's schedule and the way it's kind of played out. They've had all of these big games that are coming up on their schedule that then, a week or just weeks before the game, some air is kind of taken out of it by a Big Ten team kind of blowing it against a worse opponent. So, I mean, you look at, obviously Wisconsin losing to Illinois right before they played, and then Penn State dropping their game to Minnesota before the upcoming game this week. And now it's, Ohio State will not have that kind of vaunted matchup against an undefeated Big Ten West, representative. So I think it kind of hurts Ohio State in terms of, looking for that big premier matchup this season. But I still think Minnesota, I'm not looking at the standings right now, but I believe Minnesota, Wisconsin will come down. That game will basically be for the Big Ten West. So that'll be a huge game. And I think those are still two very good teams despite their losses. So I think regardless, Ohio State will still have a quality opponent they'll have to face.
Ohio State, with its win over Rutgers, has eliminated Michigan really from the Big Ten race in the East. If Ohio State is able to get past Penn State next week, Ohio State will clinch the East at that point, know that they will be going to Indianapolis the first weekend of December, and then, of course, you have the big game against Michigan. National news, Tua Tagovailoa, I never can pronounce his last name.
Tagovailoa.
There you go. I'm gonna have to write it down phonetically. We'll just say Tua. Alabama quarterback, knocked out of the game. He is done for the season, and it could be a much longer-lasting type of injury, as they say that it could be a career threatener, very similar to an injury that really derailed Bo Jackson's career. Before we get to big picture in terms of what this means in football, more on just the human aspect, your heart has to go out to a guy like Tua.
Yeah, I mean, obviously despite obviously there's always been a big rivalry between, these two big fan bases in Ohio State and Alabama, but obviously wishing nothing for the best for Tua as he works forward in his recovery here.
Now, we're here to talk about football and the football aspect of it. Alabama, everybody's trying to get them into the top four, or at least CBS and ESPN.
Gary Danielson.
And Gary Danielson, absolutely. The wheels are turning at this point. If they can with Mac Jones, if they're able to get past Auburn and whatnot, this definitely throws a little bit of a wrench in the SEC's hopes of getting two teams into the college football playoff field.
Yeah, I mean, I think Alabama, despite their, I believe it was 38-7 win over Mississippi State, I think they're definitely going to see a drop in the ranks. I mean, the committee has talked before about how they take these kind of situations into consideration. I believe it was Clemson last season when Kelly Bryant ended up getting injured. I think Clemson may have taken a drop in the polls a little bit. So I think they obviously take these type of these situations into consideration. So I think Alabama is absolutely going to fall this week, and I think their chance at making the playoffs is done, because I don't see how you can reasonably expect this Alabama team to compete with Mac Jones at quarterback.
Just talking about Clemson there, they rolled Wake Forest. Let's, pump the brakes a little bit. Wake Forest without their number one receiver, really their entire offense at that point. So it was 52-3 or something the last I saw. I don't know what it ended up. Everybody very excited about them. We're getting into a fun couple of final weeks. I'm not asking you to completely prognosticate the field at this point, but what kind of surprises do you think we might see along the way?
Honestly, I'm not sure if there's going to be many surprises from here on out, because I think that the injury to Tua takes Alabama out of the running here, and I think LSU. Just my personal prediction, I think LSU, Clemson, and Ohio State are going to run the table here. So you have three teams there. Then you're looking at either a potential one-loss Big 12 champion or a one-loss Pac-12 champion to take that final spot. And then it's just going to come down to resume, where I think, I don't know what the score is right now in the Baylor-Oklahoma game, but, that's obviously going to have a huge impact on kind of how the rest of the season works out. Because, if Baylor wins out, they obviously have a spot.
I just looked at the score. At the time we're recording, it's in the second quarter, 10:34 left. Baylor 28, Oklahoma 3.
Okay, so with that withstanding, so if Baylor goes undefeated, they will obviously have a spot there. And then, I think this is definitely a situation where you are going to look at a potential one-loss champion that's going to be left out of the playoffs, whether that's from the Pac-12 or, I guess we'll see what happens in the Big 12.
Right. It'll be really interesting since everybody plays everybody there, and then you take the top two teams because there are no divisions in a 10-team league there. So it'll be interesting to see how that shapes up. Texas fell to Iowa State in the last second. That was kind of a feather in the cap of LSU because they'd gone and beaten Texas in Austin, but they're up 31-7 on Ole Miss right now at the half. I think LSU is going to be able to take care of its own business and maintain where it's at. But I think it's going to be a fun couple weeks. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch. Everybody's going to be going through that. And, of course, you can go on to BuckeyeGrove.com. We'll have plenty of conversation there in the Horseshoe Lounge and everything else. But, I'm going to take this into the final stretch. Any final thoughts you have before we call it a night?
I just think, like I had said, this is kind of that final tune-up game for Ohio State before they get into that last stretch of the season. because I think it's possible Penn State will be the best team Ohio State will play until a potential playoff game. But, this final Rutgers game, now you're going into a stretch of Penn State, Michigan, a potential Big Ten championship game, and then whatever playoff matchup may await. So I think this is really that kind of tune-up game where they can look at what went wrong, whether it be, Garrett Wilson's muffed punt that turned into points for Rutgers, those types of things that Ohio State can really look at to fix before this final stretch.
Exactly. Ryan Day will have no shortage of material to work on with his team. Obviously, if you're an Ohio State fan, you would love to have seen them win this game 84-0, set all sorts of records, but maybe get knocked down to earth a little bit. Even though a lot of the problems occurred with the 2s and the 3s, is still, you still want to have those teaching moments. You don't want to be peaking the first or second week in November. It still could be a long season to go. Ohio State, 2 games left in the regular season, potential Big Ten championship game, and then up to 2 games in the postseason if they make the field of 4. But we have plenty of time to talk about that as the days and weeks go on. I want to thank Braden Moles for being part of us. He's fighting back some sort of seasonal cold or whatnot. He's done his best to keep from coughing and choking on the air, but you can catch us every week here on the BIA podcast, part of the Unscripted Ohio Network, and I want to thank everybody for listening. We will talk to you soon.
Be sure to stay up to date with Buckeye Grove Instant Access when the news breaks or after the big game, exclusively at buckeyegrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher as part of the Unscripted Ohio Podcast Network. Hit that subscribe button so you can stay in the know and never miss a single episode.